With your host, Andrew Donaldson. This is Heard Tell.
Welcome back to Heard Tell. This is going to be fun. I haven't had a chance to catch up with our friend Peter Pischke for a while. He has the Culturescape podcast and YouTube channel, just doing all kinds of fun stuff. Happy Warrior on that. Happy Warrior P on social media. Happy Warrior on the Substack. Buddy, how you doing? It's been a while.
Yeah, it has been a while. Doing good. Nice to see you. Thanks for having me on.
Always. It's been a lot. I wanted to bring you back because once again, and we've talked about this before, you cover what you affectionately called nerd culture, but I want to define it for just a second, and I'll explain what I want to talk about. Nerd culture, if you ask Gronk, which was made by nerds, so that should be somewhat accurate, is it encompasses everything from gaming to movies to comic books, anime, which I think you have to separate from comics at this point because it's so big. It's a whole wall at my public library, believe it or not. They just have a whole wall of anime now. All of those things, sci-fi, fantasy, all that. But that's what you cover. But then it also, just the gaming part of that is a $130-40 billion industry with $38 billion in revenue. Gaming alone is bigger than movies and music combined. But the nerd culture part of that influences heavily movies, music, comics, art. That's the world you deal with. But the world I deal with, politics, culture, news media, they don't even really, they know it exists, but they don't really understand it. There's not a lot of cross streams. They don't really cover it right, but it's way bigger than political media, even though political media is a little bit louder in our little bubbles. Is that a fair way to lay it out?
Very fair. Yeah, it is one of those interesting things. Like with video games, if you think about that industry, globally is worth more than TV and film put together. But it is treated by a lot of people as like lowbrow, maybe. Maybe lowbrow is not the right word, but outside of the mainstream. And it is kind of absurd because it's like more people are engaging with nerd culture, especially like with video games or anime. Anime has now eclipsed pretty much everything. Manga out of Japan, that's now bigger than comic books. So nerd culture is just taking over everything, but it doesn't seem like that rises to the upper parts or the more popular parts of our culture.
So that's why I wanted to bring you on to talk about, because here's where I think this is becoming a problem is nerds are not teenagers in the basement anymore. My generation, it was kind of Dungeons and Dragons and that sort of stuff. And then we started getting into the internet and gaming. We're 2-3 generations into online gaming now, right? Those initial people are in their 30s. They're having their own kids. The kids that have grown up since the iPhone came along are now entering their late 20s, early 30s. You see how this cascades down. That's a lot of voters. That's a lot of people that are just the backbone of the job market now. That's a lot of people that are consuming media and content. And I don't think people have realized how much that demographic encompasses how many people it really does.
Oh, no, for sure. And it's always expanding. Like if I mentioned anime earlier, China is this market, and it seems strange, but in many ways, they're just starting to enter things like anime production. They've now been in video games 10 years, but China's kind of opening that up more. So, I mean, we're only going to see an ever greater expansion of that. It's interesting that you bring up the point. I recently had the chance to interview Sandy Peterson. He made the popular RPG tabletop game Call of Cthulhu. He worked on Doom, Age of Empires, some other projects. He's in his mid-60s. He was one of that first generation that caught on to Dungeons and Dragons in the 70s and 80s. So that if that gives you any clue into like, this has been going on a lot longer than people think, but you're right. During the 2010s, it kind of blew up, and you would see more people who are in their 20s or their 30s, especially women, I'm into Critical Role and Dungeons and Dragons, and we really never had that before.
So the projection for 2025 is, and the definition of gamer they're using is anybody that's played more than 2 or 3 games annually, which is a pretty low bar. 280 million people are gamers in America. Our population is like 330-ish. That's a huge chunk of people playing games. And then you have to go in, because we're in a siloed, I just mentioned it. I was at the library with my daughter because she was doing some study time for a test at the library. One whole wall of the local library now is nothing but anime and manga. Barnes and Noble has the biggest section in Barnes and Noble in my town now is manga and games and comics and graphic novels. That's the biggest section in the store, and it's not really close when you add in the memorabilia and all the other stuff they have. You call your podcast Culturescape. This isn't just nerds talking about nerds and the nerd culture and gaming culture and sci-fi fans in this. This thing has tentacles everywhere. This is just culture now, and I think people that don't see it are just blind to it. But outside of like a Star Wars or a big IP like Marvel, they'll kind of see it. But these tentacles of this culture, it's just the culture now. Is that overstating it?
I don't think so. I think it is the culture for the majority of people, for all the plebs. I think it has a harder time, though, where you get to these upper echelons. I have a friend, Gene Park. He's the games journalist now over at the Washington Post. Very successful, does very well, but he jokingly refers to it he's in kind of a weird space at the institution because everyone else is video games, and but it's like he's covering the most popular beat technically, but he's the only one that has a slot for it at the Washington Post. It's an interesting dynamic. I wonder if that's going to change in the future, but at the moment it's kind of like, oh, you're into video games, or you're one of those people who enjoy anime. Oh, you're so beneath us. It's funny.
Yeah, Peter Pischke joining us. One of the things about this is why I bring it up is because we both kind of got into political commentary stuff. You've gone and done your Culturescape stuff. One of the things I've really had to learn, and I learned it first as a parent of having kids in that demographic, 26 to 17, So that's the demographic I've been raising as my own children, but then their friends, and then also working with people like you. Politically, they see the world very differently. They're very heterodox. They have views that traditionally politically might seem counterproductive or at cross purposes, but to them make perfect sense because they come at it at a fresh angle with fresh eyes, and they're just looking at things differently. This group of the nerd culture, gaming culture, whatever you want to call it, as they've become adults and they start to get politically active and politically aware, and the traditional political media hasn't paid a lick of attention to any of them. You just mentioned the Washington Post has one of them. They've got multiple people that do film and TV and review things, and gaming's bigger than all of that. We just covered it. Explain how you're going to have to change your nomenclature with gaming culture and nerd culture as it becomes more and more front-facing, because they don't fall under the original ideological terms. They don't fall under the old party affiliations. They don't neatly fit into left versus right and all that terminology. We have both grown up, doing political commentary. That terminology and that framework doesn't really work on these folks, does it?
No, and I think at some point, just calling geek culture and nerd culture, well, that will still have cultural cachet. I think it'll probably just take over what we call pop culture. It really is just a matter of time. It's the people who seem to be at the top or seem to control what appears to be mainstream cultural levers. With time, they will go away, or that will soften, and we'll just, have all these other people who were getting in Dungeons and Dragons as, younger mid-millennials in the 2010s. All of a sudden, now they're running these institutions.
It's an age gap thing, too, because, if you bought an NES with your own money, you're probably at least in your 50s. If you can remember an Atari 2600, I can barely. That was the first thing I ever played on. I can really... Well, we had a ColecoVision, but that's another story for another day, because that thing was weird. You mentioned that the designer that's in his 60s doing this stuff. You're now multiple generations into this thing, and I think they've become more self-aware of, because geek culture and nerd culture was always kind of like us against the world. I think we're really starting to see it more and more of like, oh, wait a minute, we're not the underdogs anymore. We just run the companies, and we're CEOs and entrepreneurs, and we're kind of the normal people now. That's changing too. It's not the Freaks and Geeks, the old joke about the old TV show. This is just people now, and as the older generation kind of starts passing off and the boomers aren't around to wave their fingers at them anymore, I've noticed with my own children, like where, people would tell us about TV, and if you tell them internet's going to rot their brain, they're going to roll their eyes and talk back about it because they're just not having it, because that's just the ecosystem they live in. That's a big culture change in and of itself, isn't it?
Yeah. It's It is interesting if you think about politics and how we occasionally get these big, I mean, you see it some in the news, but you see it especially on social media, these moral panics about Dungeons and Dragons all of a sudden, or video games. The right wing at the moment, they seem to, depending on what day of the week it is, they seem to get into being worried about video games and their negative influence on men. And it is interesting that there seems to be these warmed up spats from the 1980s that seem to show up every now and then. But I think for most people, they just, whenever they see that kind of thing, they just think that this is dated, this is silly. This comes off as like the satanic panic in the 80s.
Yeah, I was there. I remember.
Yeah, where you had like TV movies about how, how my son, he just started playing Dungeons and Dragons. All of a sudden, he was in a satanic sex cult. As you do. But most people are just like, this is just, whatever, you just give me a reason to blow you off. And so I find that kind of stuff funny, but I'm also like, well, if you're into politics and you want people to care about your ideology or your party or your issue or whatever it is, you're just blowing all these people off when you get into that, which is too bad. And if you were to actually engage in a lot of these things, so you're going to get into anime, you've not watched a lot of anime, now you're watching Hayao Miyazaki Studio Ghibli films. Well, those are masterpieces of their art form, and they're very they just raise you up when you watch things. And there's just so much that people can get into that's just of such high quality. I think sometimes the issue is for some people, they still think, oh, it's just games. Oh, it's just those weird looking cartoons. I'm not going to try it. But for those who do, it's not uncommon where I hear from someone and they're in their 60s and they're talking about Twitter. Oh, I just decided I was going to watch this thing that my grandkids are in for the first time. It's like, oh, this is so good. How did I not know about this all these years?
Yeah, let me give you two quick examples of this and you can comment on them. When you talk about the last generation, Tipper Gore told my generation Snoop Dogg was the worst thing ever and was going to ruin our country, and he just hosted the Olympics. Like, he was the guy on NBC hosting the Olympics, right? That's the change in 30 years on that. And then I think the other more recent example is, I remember when Facebook first came along and you had to have a college email to get on Facebook. And now it's boomerland, and my kids wouldn't go anywhere near Facebook if you tried to make them do it because it's the uncool place. So even more, like, one thing we don't talk enough about with these culture war issues with technology is how fast it changes. And having said that, though, the gaming culture has steadied a lot longer than Facebook lasted. It's steadied a lot longer than the satanic panic. And that was a real thing, kids. Go look it up. Just believe me, I saw the gospel tracks about how rock music was going to send us all to hell. I remember all that. How the internet was going to be bad. Gaming has, I think, transcended that because we're a good, I don't know whatever metric you want to put it on. I put it when gaming went online because I think that's where it really changed. You're not calling your friends and you're not gaming as a group. You can game online. Man, we're a good 20 years in the modern gaming era now, and it's sustained. And I don't think those kind of accusations, one, they don't work. I think they're almost mockable and laughable now. It's like, no, this is just how it is for people now.
Oh, well, for sure. And, there are people, when Matt Walsh wants to go on about the problems of guys playing video games or I don't want to bring this too much into politics, but you follow any of these Medicaid debates, what's going on right now with the big, beautiful bill out in Washington, D.C. And how is it framed every time? They're saying, oh, those guys, they just want to sit in their basements. And what are they doing? They're playing video games. And it goes with this kind of older stereotype. And it's like, no, we're not, maybe we were never really in that space before, but we're definitely not there now. I mean, people of all ages are playing this, and they could be playing those games for all sorts of reasons. And it's a pretty steady hobby. Look, it's a relatively inexpensive hobby. It's something that's pretty accessible to everyone or anyone that really wants to get into it. I have some friends that are in the disability accessibility space for video games. And so these are people who you would think they wouldn't be able to play video games. Maybe they have visual problems, or they're blind, or maybe they have a physical deformity so they can't play it. But there is a very sizable and growing part of gaming where they're finding solutions around these things. So it's this huge, beautiful piece of the culture. It's just like telling people, well, let's just write off sports. Let's just write off sports. People who watch sports are weird. All those weirdos. It's like, no, that's unwise, because that's like everyone. Don't do that. But that lesson, unfortunately, has yet to sink in.
You brought up politics because I am going to get into politics because I think this is fascinating. Something like a Medicare Medicaid debate, which we've been having all our lives and will have for the rest of our lives. That's always going to be there because it's a kick the can down the road thing that's going to blow up sometime, but we're going to all debate it. What does break through? Because you do content creator, you are a content creator, you're in that YouTube, TikTok kind of space where these people, the regular politics that we discuss don't break through. They don't know how the big, beautiful bill goes to committee. They don't know how reconciliation process works. They probably don't know much about Trump's tariffs other than hearing about them. They don't know how the process works. But some news stories break through. So what stories politically are breaking through? Because it seems like healthcare is one of those that always breaks. I don't care what your level of knowledge is, everybody's got a take on healthcare, right? Mm-hmm. They'll probably have an opinion on Trump because he has 100% name recognition. But what do you see breaks through to like a gaming content creator or people who are not normally politically, but all of a sudden they'll get fired up on a particular topic?
Anything that's going to definitely touch upon their ability to access the internet or access games. So censorship is a big thing that always gets a lot of talk. Anything where they have people who are gamers who are being kind of stereotyped or labeled either in politics or media, that always gets it. And then I think just general kitchen table issues like with the Medicaid and Medicare, that kind of stuff, healthcare that affects everyone. And so some of that will always break through. It's not always the most deep discussion. I think if you kind of want to get a feel for where even most younger guys are these days, I think even the Trump electorate, you watch someone like the most popular YouTube streamer, Asmongold, for this kind of thing for younger men. And that gives you a good sense of the zeitgeist where all that is. And it's like, it's very socially liberal, economically conservative, and very culturally libertarian. So if you're expecting you're going to get like great debates on politics, it's just not really going to happen. But if you want to hear what people are worried about, where they're coming from, that sort of thing is not too hard to find.
Yeah, and I want to defend the culture on this a little bit. Peter Pischke joining us, because people are like, oh, well, they don't want to have an in-depth debate. I've been doing this a little while now, right? I do radio, TV, but I've done the politics thing for a while. The amount of people that want to have in-depth debates is really, really small. And the number of that people that actually want to have a debate other than just yell about what they already believe is even smaller. Very few people actually want to have a debate about anything. They don't mind having discussions, but what we in the media as content, and look, I've been on the talking head panels where people are screaming, so I'm guilty too. I try to avoid them, but it happens. Very few people want to watch that, and I've got the ratings and the data to back it up. They don't care. The 9-head panel shows on network news are not doing super well, especially compared to numbers in streaming and numbers in podcasting. They just aren't. So I think there's this dismissive thing of saying, well, they don't want to have an in-depth discussion and they don't want to debate the issues. Like, no, I think a lot of them just know what they believe and they don't really want somebody yelling at them about it. Is that like a nomenclature thing we probably need to change? Because I know that younger generation, man, and I've got kids that age that are, they're practically all adults now. They don't want you wagging their finger at them. They're not having it. That's not the culture that generation has at all.
Yes, true. And especially though for young men, people who are my age or younger, so 30s and 20s, there's definitely a feeling of that the older generations had failed us, especially the boomers. And so a lot of that yelling at each other, a lot of that politics culture just seems like that's part of their thing. And it seems like it's just unhelpful and kind of pointless. And even with online, when people do get into debate culture, if you've ever heard the phrase debate me, bro, it's basically like how many logical tricks can I try to push in 30 seconds? And it's just, Destiny, Hassan kind of stuff. I'm never into it. Some people are, but it just seems so disingenuous. So that causes a lot of people just like, we're not even going to engage.
Yeah, I agree. I think the debate me bro stuff, I avoid it like the plague. And I think I've been wise to do so. I wanted to ask you it this way too, because you're what I call a working class content creator, and I mean that as a compliment. I don't mean that as a dig at all. there's this perception in the media and a lot of people that don't understand content creation that, oh, you get a YouTube channel and, they're just freeloading money. It's just easy money. They work little. Like, the amount of people that are making really good livings making YouTube videos is really small. I just know this for a fact. There's a very small group of people that get a lot of press that make a whole lot of money, but most people are really hustling at it. Kind of go behind the veil for people that aren't familiar with content creation or doesn't understand that YouTube is what TV was in the 50s. Now this is just where people are at for their information, because you've got a successful channel by any metric, but you can do a video that has 100,000 views and then you do another video a week later and it'll have a couple hundred views. And it's not that you did anything different. It's just algorithms. There's a lot of luck involved. It depends on the thing. Talk about that part of it, because I don't think people understand, especially that older generation. They don't understand. No, there's a lot of hustle that goes into being a content creator. There's a lot of hard work. For me to put out a 1 hour herd tell, that's about 6-7 hours of work by the time I've edited it and done everything to it. And that's if I'm really, really booking at it and it's clean. Just give people the behind the scenes a little bit, because I think you're the good person as kind of a working class content creator of, no, this is what it's really like to put out content like this. And it is a hard job. And there is a reason why there's a monetized system that's kind of hard to get that bag.
Yeah, no, there are tens of millions of people who are YouTubers, and just I forget the number, but it's like 5 to 10% of them maybe get to a point where they're allowed to access Google AdSense. So you have to cross 1,000 subscribers, you have to have 40,000 watch hours, and then of those that actually get past 5,000 subs, then to 10,000 subs or above, and those are still considered very small. You're just cutting into it more and more. So you're right. Very few people actually are doing YouTube and make something that is akin to a minimum wage, or something that they can live off of. And it's a lot of work. Like, the people that are doing it that can make I hate to use this term, living wage on YouTube, you're just constantly working, and you're basically working overtime. And Google, for example, you're not just having to rely on Google AdSense, so that when YouTube gives ads, you get a small little cut of that fee that the YouTube charges advertisers, and that's just not enough. You hardly make anything. So most YouTubers now are making their money on sponsorship deals with companies. And it's just constantly having to grind, and because it's it's so cutthroat, it's a very libertarian ideal of a free market, very laissez-faire, which is good and bad. But you're right, you just have to constantly hustle. It's interesting because I'm noticing it's like every other celebrity, every other news person, now they have their own YouTube channel. And it feels like as the older models of media are kind of waning and dying, that everyone now is shifting over to YouTube. And it'll be interesting to watch in the next 2-3 years, see how that all works. Because while it's cool that so many people want to get into it, there's only so many viewers to go around. There's so much watch time to go around. I wonder how that's going to change things, or if YouTube's going to step in and try to stack the deck for some of these established media people.
Yeah, I think they're going to end up having the problem Substack's having right now, where you're going to wind up with tiers. But we'll dig into that at some. They're going to have to at some point, because you got to have the superstars to get everybody else to jump in. And if you don't delineate from the superstars some way, your business. But we'll talk about that some other time. Peter Pischke with us. For political people that actually care about things like policy discussions, because there's all this debate about how do you penetrate, the content culture with a political message. And my first response, a couple of times I've been asked by serious people about this. I'm like, well, number one, don't act like you're trying, because they're going to smell it all over you and it's not going to work. Talk about how people should approach this kind of a medium if you're trying to get into, we're calling it nerd culture, and I feel bad using the term because it's not really, I don't think it's a fair term, but for lack of a better one, the YouTube culture, the content creation culture. I did a speaking gig and I told a room full of people and their mouths dropped. And I'm like, look, if you can't explain property rights in a 50-second TikTok ad, you're going to lose a generation on what property rights means. You got to learn how to do this stuff. Mm-hmm. Give some advice if they're listening to the olds, which including me, because I just turned 45. How to approach these people. And I tell them honestly, my take is I'm like, you better be real. You better be upfront. Don't put on airs. Don't try to be something you're not. Just be straight up. And if they like it, they like it. And they don't, and then let it go, because you're not going to get any further. What advice would you give them?
I would say try to put the professional lens down, and I would say try to more personal angle. You're right, because if you come off desperate or you come off pushy, people are just burnt out on all that. Many of us have escaped some of those more legacy platforms, of those, the Fox News, the talking heads stuff, and it's just a giant turnoff. People love long form content, and they love people who are being genuine. So if you think you're going to go onto these platforms and you're just going to do your same old shtick, it's just not going to land at all, and people will notice that pretty quick. But I think if you are genuine and you're willing to learn, you're willing to put in the work, it takes some time to kind of learn the ins and outs, learning how to polish your craft. There is a great opportunity there, but you do have a point, and it seems like, especially when we get closer to the mainstream, so more towards the centers, that they seem to really struggle with this. And it's kind of interesting that it's both the far left and the far right that have done super well on content creation, but the more traditional Republican Democrats, that they're the ones that have struggled.
Yeah, because it's audience capture. I've done everything from, I've published in Spectator, I've been on Young Turks. It's all audience capture, and the way you audience capture is you get the most ate up, bought in people to constantly consume your product. The problem is, the more you do that, you exclude everybody else, because they're like, yeah, look at those weirdos over there in the corner, and they're it's the penguins running across the glacier. They're all in this little ball, right? And I think that's the part that, and I'm guilty of it sometimes too. You get in your bubble. We already talked, this is all siloed off, like everybody's got their little internet clicks, and they don't realize you just look like that group of penguins running all together for warmth, and you don't realize that's how it comes off to everybody else, and you lose the broad perspective. Business wise, if you want to make money, you got to have a broad perspective. Otherwise, you're just going to chase that same small audience over and over and over again, and it's going to have a shelf life.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that is kind of like, that's one of the negatives of, especially when it comes to like news and politics, and when you're trying to get something that's closer to an objective view. YouTube and the social media platforms generally don't reward that as much, because these are based on filling a niche. So you have your core audience, and they're going to be for a very specific micro niche. It's not just, oh, I cover sports. No, it's like, I cover sports from this region for this level for this particular sport. It's like super niche. And the problem with that is that, as a journalist, sometimes you're going to be covering something like, it's not what people want it to be. It's not what people think. Sometimes you're going to say information that it's not really interesting. It's kind of boring. All that stuff doesn't really play on YouTube. You kind of have to constantly be feeding them red meat. Give the Coliseum spectators what they want. And that, I think, in the future, in the long run, is going to lead to problems as people are shifting everything over to the content creation sphere, the influencer model for news. And I am curious to see where that goes. But what to do about it, I don't know.
I want to ask you too, you brought up the men thing. Look, it's the hot topic of young men, whatever that means. And that I think they're failing by defining that to start with, but we'll set that aside for the minute. Especially the political consultant class is just absolutely obsessed over reaching the young, unaffected males that have given into really bad public behavior online. I cut against the grain on that a little bit, because I think if you're trying to reach a bunch of people whose main online identity is being a bunch of jackasses, you're not going to really glean any wheat from that field anyway. However, you're in that space a little bit more than I am. I can sit back and just kind of throw rocks at it, because I think they're just not good people that have very few redeeming qualities to start with. Is it an overblown problem? Is the coverage just about right? Are they undercovering it? How does it hit you? Because I know we've talked about it a little bit privately, but this is getting to be a bigger thing, because the consultant class has figured out how to make money on this. Let's call it what it is. How big of a problem is it really? Because the internet is always going to attract the really bad element that just wants to show the world how much of a jackass they are, and they're going to do that, and they're just going to put politics or games or whatever on top of that to try to excuse it. But where do you fall on it? Is this an overblown problem? Is it an undercover problem? How do you think about it?
The majority of my audience are guys that are between about 18 and 35. These are people who are interested in nerd culture stuff. Geek culture stuff. So they like games, or they like anime, they like manga, they like comics. They're really deep into some particular small thing. Like they're super into BattleTech, which is like was the off-brand Warhammer tabletop game. But I, a lot of my audience, from talking with them, I'm kind of part of this group where they feel very disaffected. I think sometimes the problem with labels, especially we give from like the media and politics, is like say we're doing, the people who get called incels. Well, these are people who have, for a lot of them, there's a lot of damage there, and they're not just one thing. They're many different things. I think we are so quick to write people like that off, and I think if you engage honestly and actively, yes, you're always going to have some people who are going to be buttheads. That is true, though, anything you do on the internet. But if you're engaging with people sincerely, more often than not, you're going to get the majority of them on your side, and they will engage in a fair way. Now, it's not perfect. If I cover something, I'm like, you know what, you guys are wrong. It's actually this other way. Or I bring on someone they don't like. I get a lot of heat for it. But it's like sometimes I feel like maybe as a content creator, okay, now it's time to eat the vegetables. And that's not always a good way to build a channel. But I do think it is really sad and frustrating me, because I do counsel right now some guys who kind of fall into that category, and they've seen a lot of damage, and a lot of it, some of it may be their fault, but a lot of it was stuff the society pushed on, or their broken families, and I feel like it's kind of wrong how we all treat them. And I think if you actually are like trying to talk to them fairly, I think you'll find that on most positions and issues, they're actually fairly reasonable. And then like one or two things, they're kind of crazy. And as long as you don't get into crazy, I think they're perfectly fine.
Talking about crazy, it's kind of, I have a little, look, I have no problem whacking people that have bad behavior, and you need to say, no, that's bad. One of the problems that we just have to admit is like when our political leaders are acting really bad, I think it's okay, we're going to beat up on this random person on the internet, but the president won't behave himself, or a senator, or miss me with the politics. You elect a Democrat president, I'm going to get all over him too. Just relax. I find that disconnect to maybe be something important that we don't talk about, because I think cancel culture is an abused term that doesn't get used correctly. I think the thing where we just want to dogpile random people, but we don't want to hold actual people that hold power accountable, says something really bad about a society where we have a whole lot of technology to have more power to influence power than anybody in the history of the world has ever had. And we're using it to beat up on the guy in Paducah that said something stupid on the internet. Not that we shouldn't do that, but we don't have the same furor for the people that are actually in power doing things. I think that's actually a really huge problem with internet online culture, more so than some of the other stuff we talk about.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the big things I think that escapist media and culture has exploded. A big part of it is because everything else is breaking down, and people want somewhere where they can invest themselves and feel safe, and kind of escape from a lot of this. And if people, look, Matt Walsh gets a lot of clicks when he starts saying, "Oh, all these guys, they're just incels. These people who play video games, they're never going to get laid. They're a bunch of worthless losers. They're modern version of the welfare queen, if you remember that from the 90s and 80s. That is just, if you think that's going to work as a long-term strategy, I have bad news for you. You're just blowing off loads and loads and loads of people. And the reason why they're escaping to places like this is because people have just blown them off, and things are breaking down, and they feel like they're just constantly being given a bad deal. So to jump on top of them, say, you are horrible and nasty, that you are in this thing that you escaped to get away from everything else that was horrible and nasty. Not a good marketing move, not a good political move. And I wonder if over time, maybe some people will catch on to that. Maybe or not.
Will. No, I think they will. Look, I remember the welfare queen thing. We're getting ready to do it again. We're talking, anytime you're talking about SNAP, that used to be food stamps. I remember the food stamp thing was a huge part of the welfare queen thing. And then there was, of course, the class connotations and the race connotations and everything else. I remember all that. And I'm not surprised it's getting applied to gamers, because it actually didn't have anything to do with what they said it had to do. It just had to do with, if I'm getting my government check, that's good. If that person's getting a government check, well, they must be taking something from me. That's what those arguments always boil down to. So, of course, they're going to, apply it to the nerds. Peter Pischke joining us. Boy, this one just flew by, man. This is good stuff. I have to get you back. Let people know what's going on with Culturescape, what you got going on, where they can follow you. Look, we just talked about the toxic guys that are online. You're one of the good ones, my friend, and I appreciate you. Not just the culture stuff. You do good stuff with disability, and you've been doing more and more on things like medication, pain management, that sort of stuff, especially as we start getting into this healthcare debates that are coming. I know you want to get into that stuff. Just let people know where they can find you on Culturescape and what you got going on, my friend.
Yeah, you can find Culturescape. Just type it in a Google search. It's the show that interviews the geek creators, influencers who built nerd culture. We have about 100 videos now over 3 years. They're great interviews. They're usually 69 minutes. We try to deep dive into and just kind of let people share their stories, from their experiences. Kind of not exactly avoid politics, just let people share their thing. We just put out an interview with cult indie filmmaker Jason Tross. We have an upcoming one with Sandy Peterson, who I mentioned earlier. Our most popular, most recent one, just from a few weeks ago, was with Johnny Young Bosch. He's like the most popular male voice actor in anime right now. He's the lead voice of Dante in the Devil May Cry Netflix show that people were talking about a month ago. So the good stuff there. And I think if you want to get an insight with what people in this, this unobtainable male demographic, the nerds, if you want to get insight about what they're all about, I think my show would be a good way to do it. And of course, I'm on Twitter too much, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, Culturescape. It's fun. It's good. Find on YouTube, Spotify, wherever else you listen to your podcast, I guess.
I know nothing about any of this culture other than what I learned from people like you, but I actually know who Johnny Young Bosch is because I met him. My kids a couple of years ago, her and her friends were all into cosplay, and they had the big Comic-Con. That one was in Raleigh, I think, and I took him to him, and I drew the escorting duty, so I'm the guy in the street clothes, and everybody else is in their anime get up, so I was sticking out, but he was one of the tables that they went and talked to, and he was just the nicest possible guy. Really took time to talk to, there, how those things are. They're long line queues, but you can tell who's going through the motions and who actually is taking and giving a little effort, right? And he was a give an effort guy and seemed to really enjoy talking to people, so seemed like a good dude.
He is. I don't know if you can see in my background. He sent, because we were talking about, used to have a photo autograph of his, and I had lost it. I still can't find it. So he had, after I'd done the interview, he just sent me a new one. And yeah, he's a classy dude. He's a really classy dude. I like Johnny a lot.
Good deal. Check out the YouTube. It's great. I'm going to have you back and we'll talk some policy stuff. I've got some stuff working on disability too, you and me, because we're both disabled type folk. I think whatever terminology we want to use for that. We're half broke, but we're pushing through it. We encourage all of you to do it too. My friend, greatly appreciate you. Good catching up with you. We'll talk again soon, buddy.
You too. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, sir.
All the music on Heard Tell is provided under a Creative Content license from monstercat.com.
Somos la máquina.